Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, I should say. This morning we're going to talk about when churches disagree with each other, when people in churches disagree with each other. So I'm going to start off with returning to the middle of the book of Acts, Acts chapter 15, verses 35 through 41. Paul and Barnabas also remained in Antioch, teaching and preaching the word of the Lord with many others also. Then after some days, Paul said to Barnabas, "Let us now go back and visit our brethren in every city where we have preached the word of the Lord and see how they were doing." Now Barnabas was determined to take with them John called Mark, but Paul insisted that they should not take with them the one who had departed from them in Pamphylia and had not gone with them to the work. Then the contention became so sharp that they parted from one another. And so Barnabas took Mark and sailed to Cyprus, and Paul chose Silas and departed, being commended by the brethren to the grace of God. And he went through Syria and Cilicia, strengthening the churches. So what's going on here? Well, Paul and Barnabas had been buddies. They had been worked together for years. They were both elders at the church at Antioch, and they set out sometime earlier on a great missionary journey, and they went across they sailed from from Antioch to Cyprus. They went across the island of Cyprus, having many adventures and everything. Then they sailed up to Asia Minor, to modern day Turkey, and at the city of Pamphylia, they made port, and that's where their companion, John Mark, left them. We don't know why John Mark left there, but Paul and Barnabas then had proceeded to go up, around, and about and through Asia Minor, and made many converts, nearly got killed, and probably several times, and basically went through a lot together. And then they came back home to Antioch, where they stayed for a while, and then there was an upset because of questions about whether or not the Gentiles should be circumcised, and so Paul and Barnabas together went on a campaign and went through Samaria, and they came up to Jerusalem to argue about it, and then came home again. And they had been working together for years, and you would think that they could overcome any obstacle, but what they did not overcome was the question of John Mark. Now, John Mark was not a bad person, and Paul and Barnabas were very good people. But, well, we first encountered John Mark in the Bible because of Peter. It is mentioned at one point Peter was let out of prison by an angel, and when he left the prison, he wound up going to a house where all the believers were praying, and it turns out the house was owned by John Mark's mother, or at least was considered to be her house. And that implies that John Mark was a young man, and that his mother was a leader among the faithful. Then at the end of Acts chapter 12, the Bible mentions that Barnabas brought John Mark back with them, with him and Paul, to Antioch to be there. And that we think would be around the year 44. And that means that John Mark lived in Antioch with them for a good 4 years before Paul and Barnabas set out on their first missionary journey. And Mark did not just leave them right away. He went all the way across the island of Cyprus. And it was only when they got to Asia Minor that he left. And Paul had trouble getting over it. Paul was not happy. Paul said, this is what the Bible says in verse 38. It says, "But Paul insisted that they should not take with them the one who had departed from them in Pamphylia." Now that word departed, the Greek word there, can also be translated as deserted. Departed, deserted. And so Paul would have very good reason. Apparently Paul felt very strongly about this. And then also he goes on to say, "and had not gone with them to the work." Well, what were they doing in Cyprus? Were they laying around on the beach? No. But here's the difference. To any of us, to most of us, what they were doing in Cyprus would have seemed like hard work. They were going around, they were preaching, they were talking about Jesus, but they were also in Barnabas's home territory. They had not yet gotten away from the areas that had heard about Christianity yet. They had not yet gotten away from the areas that had heard about Judaism. They were still where they were comfortable. It is only when they get up into where modern day Turkey is, Asia Minor, that suddenly they're encountering people who have never heard of any of this stuff before, who have no idea who God is, no idea who Jesus is. And that's when Mark went home. So Paul might very well have considered that, well, that Mark didn't do any work. Now, personally, I think that's a bit unfair, because I think most of us would consider going across Cyprus proof enough that you are a good missionary, but not for Paul. But then again, Paul was eager to preach to people who had never been preached to before. He was eager to talk about Jesus, and eventually we'll see Paul being eager to talk about Jesus even before Caesar, if he can. Well, so the conversation grew sharp, as the Bible puts it, and Paul and Barnabas wind up going their separate ways. And here is the part that I want to emphasize here. These are all good people. All three of these people, including John Mark, would go on to do great things for God. You know, Paul talks constantly about grace. It is hard to believe that he wouldn't give somebody a chance. Good people sometimes disagree. And ideally, when two people disagree, they do it while they're still loving each other and caring about each other. Ideally, they discuss things through, and if they still disagree, they're still in peace with each other. A few years ago, I was attending a church, and if you're from that church, I understand that I had no bone to pick with anybody, but there was a big argument, a huge argument. Feelings were hurt, and over what? Over a window. Not a window in the sanctuary, a window in a back hallway where nobody went hardly ever. The question was whether to, and the window was beautiful, but it was whether to have the window be replaced with kind of an old-fashioned type of glass, or to replace it with a more modern window, one that would save the church on bills. And people got really mad about this. And they didn't have to. Because one of the things that happened was that this debate kind of got personal. It got heated. So how do we disagree without hurting each other? How can we disagree in a godly manner? In other words, how can we fight fair within the church? Let's say the number one thing is to keep focused on God's work. It's easy. It's in some ways it's easier to argue about a window than to discuss how you're helping the children in your community. It is easy to get into a petty argument than to do what you need to be doing for God. And I hate to say that. And yet, it's so much more rewarding when you're doing something to help kids. It's so much more rewarding when you're doing something to benefit the community. Never make it personal. Personal would be Paul saying to Mark, "You left us in Pamphylia. Why would we take you again, you lazy person?" Not being personal would be Paul saying, "Mark, we are going into some hard places to preach in, and I am hoping that we go far further than we went last time." In the second example, Paul is making it about the mission and not about John Mark himself. And to do that, you have to speak with compassion and caring. People always come first. Remember this. The person who disagrees with you, they are also one of God's children. No matter how wrong they are one of God's children, and their feelings deserve some consideration. And my hope is that even though Paul and Barnabas split and went different ways, that they did so still caring about each other. Do not support people in leadership positions who view people as people to be taken advantage of. Sometimes you get somebody who is in a leadership position who thinks that the right thing to do in life is that when you see somebody is weak and vulnerable, you take advantage of them. That is not the Christian way. Tell the truth. Do not lie unless it's to save somebody's life. That's why I generally say. And don't lie just to be kind. Don't smooth something over. Be honest. You know, sometimes if you lie, even just to be kind, that can blow up in your face. Be polite. You know, sometimes people will say, I'm just being honest, following the first rule. But the thing is, though, is that generally there's a way to be both kind and honest about things. Don't talk behind other people's backs. It's fine if I was to call somebody and be like, okay, so how do you feel about this window thing? It is not okay for me to say, well, do you know that so-and-so says that that window needs to be done like this, and then she went to him and him went to her. Oh, no, that's just poison. Psychologists have this thing that they call triangling. And it's where two people get together and they talk about a third person, and it makes those two people feel like they're closer together because they're talking about a third person. That is not a healthy way to build up your friendships or your relationships. Because in the end, you're just bonding, frankly, in an evil way. What you should do is get together and talk about how you feel about that window. But don't talk about he said or she said. Don't do that. Now, are there times where you do have to talk about other people? Of course. But be kind. And don't do it so that you're getting some advantage over somebody else. You know, one time there was a very good Sunday school teacher, and every week she spent hours preparing her lesson. One week she was very tired from her job, and in the lesson she accidentally referred to Jesus as John. Now, in this class there was a man who wanted to be the Sunday school teacher himself. So when the teacher made that mistake, that week he called up everybody he could think of and said, boy, she must not be right with God to make a mistake like that. You know, I wonder how often she makes that sort of mistake. How, you know, she misquoted the Bible. Well, when this got back to her, she was so sad about it that she quit teaching Sunday school, and she never taught Sunday school again. Poison. The man that was placed in charge of the Sunday school class was the one who had dripped the poison. And pretty soon, because he was constantly talking bad about people, he no longer had a Sunday school class. The church no longer had a Sunday school class, and it wound up splitting the whole church. Don't call other ideas stupid. Take them seriously. Even if somebody wants to paint your church neon green so that it shows up at night, it glows. To that person, they think that's a good idea. Don't tell them they're stupid. Don't say your idea is stupid. but just say, I really don't like that color. Don't be a bulldozer. I'm an idealist. I suspect that Paul was also an idealist. And one thing about being an idealist is that we tend to want to make the world be a certain shape. And when you have a vision, try not to run over other people. Listen to them. Propose your idea. Listen to them. Don't overwhelm them with the entirety of your vision, because generally they'll reject it then, because everybody's a little scared of change. But don't run over people. Oh, hello, kitty. Well, that was bound to happen at some point. Stay calm even when you have a kitty hop on your desk. She has been in the shower. Her back is wet right now, but I'm not getting fussy about that. Stay calm. Stay calm like you're petting a wet cat. And of course, all of that can be summarized as treat your neighbor like you want to be treated. And my hope is that Paul and Barnabas followed all of that and still separated. As for John Mark, well, I think he did okay. John Mark went on to become the author of the Gospel of Mark that is in the Bible. John Mark, we believe, made it all the way to Rome, where he was Paul's assistant. I think that John Mark did okay for himself. All right, thank you all very much for watching, and I hope you have a blessed day. Go ahead and cut it, honey.